The Cook. A historical fiction of love, identity and fate by S.J. Jeppsson. Chapter 2. Lydia Weatherby. Across the sea, Lydia Weatherby had grown up surrounded by the wealth and refinement of Weatherby House. A luxury she had long since learned was a gilded cage, a sprawling estate of ivory stone and emerald gardens. The grand estate had been her world since birth. The halls echoed with the soft patter of servants' feet, the delicate clinking of fine china, and the measured voices of polite society. Towering windows framed sweeping views of the Long Island Sound, where the water sparkled like cut glass in the summer and froze over like polished marble in the winter. From the outside it was perfection, but inside Lydia often felt like a beautifully kept bird, perched in a house too large, a future too small. At 11 years old, she had been sent away to Boundary Oak Academy, her parents deciding that a proper lady was best shaped by discipline and distance. It was expected, just another step in the carefully laid out path of a debutante destined for greatness. But before the academy, before the stiff gowns and measured curtsies, Lydia's world had revolved around Prudence Prudy Henshaw, her governess, and the closest thing she had ever known to a mother. Prudy had been there for Lydia's first wobbly steps, her scraped knees, and her whispered childhood dreams. Where her mother had been distant, more occupied with social obligations and the running of the household, Prudy had been constant, warm, and wise. She had even given Lydia her first and only pet, a scrappy velvet-eared spaniel pup she had smuggled into the nursery wrapped in an old shawl. Lydia had squealed with delight, clutching the soft little bundle to her chest as its tongue darted happily at her cheek. She named him Winston on the spot. Her parents had been scandalized, of course. Pets were not allowed in the house, especially not in the nursery, and certainly not by a child who was meant to grow up with pristine white gloves and perfect posture. But Prudy had stood her ground, laughing gently, arms folded across her chest as Margaret Weatherby scolded her in clipped tones. Prudy had calmly insisted that every child deserves something that loves them back without condition. Winston had stayed. That night, Lydia had curled up with him at the foot of her bed, his warm little body pressed against her toes, and Prudy had sat on the edge of the mattress, brushing the hair from her forehead. "Not everyone gets to choose their world, my girl," she had murmured. "But you get to choose what kind of heart you carry through it." She had taught Lydia how to carry herself with grace, how to sip tea without clinking the porcelain, how to fold her hands just so while seated in the drawing room. Under Prudy's watchful eye, Lydia had learned to sit, stand, and speak in a way befitting a young lady of high society. But more than that, Prudy had taught her something far more valuable. True grace, she had often reminded Lydia, adjusting her posture with a gentle touch, is not only in how you walk into a room, but in how you treat the people in it. And so, beneath the rigid lessons of etiquette, Lydia had learned kindness. She had learned that a curtsy meant nothing if given without sincerity, that words, no matter how elegantly spoken, were empty if not spoken with honesty, that fine lace and silk could never outshine a heart full of compassion. And when the day had finally come for Lydia to leave for Boundary Oak Academy, it had been Prudy, not her mother, who had embraced her at the foot of the grand staircase, smoothing down her travelling coat with steady, calloused hands, whispering, "Remember who you are, my girl, not just what they want you to be." For years, Lydia had carried those words like a secret tucked in her chest, holding onto them tightly even as the world around her tried to shape her into something else. The night before Lydia departed for boarding school, her father, Charles Weatherby, had called her into his study. The room had always smelled of rich mahogany and parchment, the warm glow of the fire casting flickering shadows across the shelves lined with leather-bound books. It was a place of quiet authority, where the weight of decisions settled in ink and signatures, where her father built an empire with unwavering precision. But that night, something was different. As she stepped inside, he turned from the window, the golden lamplight accentuating the sharp angles of his face. In his hand, he held a small velvet box. Without a word, he flipped it open, revealing a delicate gold locket resting on a bed of dark satin. Lydia's breath hitched as he placed it gently into her palm. It was an exquisite piece. An elegant oval, polished to a fine gleam, its hinges delicate but sturdy. She traced her thumb over its cool surface before carefully pressing it open. Inside, 2 tiny tin photographs were nestled within. Her father on one side, his steady gaze captured in black and white, and her mother, Margaret, on the other, her beauty frozen in time, her expression serene. "This way," Charles had said quietly, his voice steady yet tinged with something unspoken, something fragile. "No matter where you go, we will always be with you." Lydia had never seen her father waver before. He was a man of composure, of careful calculations and measured words, a self-made mogul whose fortune had reshaped their family name. Yet, in that moment, there had been something else in his eyes, something raw. She had swallowed the lump in her throat, curled her fingers protectively around the locket, and nodded. "I promise I won't lose it," she said, her voice carrying the unshakable conviction of childhood. And she never had. On her 16th birthday, a parcel had arrived at Boundary Oak wrapped in brown paper and tied with lavender twine. Prudy's unmistakable touch. Inside was a hardcover edition of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, its pages edged in gold and its binding the soft shade of rose tea. Lydia had devoured it that very night by candlelight, and had returned to it again and again over the past 2 years. Elizabeth Bennet had become something of a compass for her, a reminder that wit, will, and a fiercely independent heart could carry a woman farther than any dowry ever would. Now, at 18, Lydia was finally returning home, but she was not returning to freedom. She was returning to an arranged future, to a life decided for her long before she ever had a say in it. Her parents had not only chosen her husband, they had chosen his title, Lord Thomas Hollingsworth. The match was not for love, nor even for wealth, at least not in the way that mattered to her. The Weatherbys had money, more than enough to buy their way into every gilded ballroom in New York. But money alone was not enough. Her parents wanted legacy, they wanted respectability, they wanted a noble name to pair with their fortune, to secure a future where their wealth would not only be acknowledged, but legitimized in the eyes of society. That was why they had chosen Thomas, an English lord with ancient land holdings, a fine family name, and an estate in need of new life. He had the title, she had the money. Their union was a transaction, a neatly arranged contract dressed in lace and gold. They had exchanged a handful of letters over the past year, cordial, polite, laced with the careful formality of two people speaking from opposite ends of a script. She had written about her love of literature, her favourite piano compositions, the gardens of Weatherby House, where wisteria draped over the stone arches like lilac-coloured waterfalls.
Dear Lord Hollingsworth, you asked about my interests. I do enjoy piano, though I admit I sometimes prefer playing slightly too fast, much to the horror of my instructors. I read voraciously, anything from Austen to the Scandal pages, and I've recently taken up sketching, badly but with great enthusiasm. The violets are in bloom, and I've taken to reading in the conservatory again. Dickens this time, though I suspect Jane Austen would approve more of our arrangement. Yours, Lydia Weatherby.
In return, Thomas had detailed the history of Hollingsworth Estate, the intricacies of its upkeep, and the responsibilities that came with it.
Miss Weatherby, the western roof of Hollingsworth Estate has finally been repaired after the last winter gale. I've instructed the staff to ready the blue drawing room for your eventual arrival, As my mother assures me, it has the most flattering light for pianoforte practice. Respectfully, Thomas Hollingsworth.
Their letters had remained polite, but the contrast between them was unmistakable. His clipped and proper, hers laced with a hint of mischief, as though she were constantly on the verge of laughing at the whole arrangement.
Dear Lord Hollingsworth, I confess I had to read twice to fully absorb your description of the West Gardens drainage system. A thrilling subject, to be sure. I shall endeavour to match your enthusiasm when next I discuss the Weatherby topiary, which, I might add, has recently been trimmed into the shape of a goose. My mother is mortified. As for our wisteria, it's currently plotting a full takeover of the pergola. I admire its ambition. Respectfully, Miss Lydia Weatherby.
Nothing deeply personal. No confessions of longing, no glimpses into the quiet corners of his soul. Their words had been carefully chosen, each letter a diplomatic dance rather than an intimate conversation. Along with his letters, he had sent her a tin photograph. Lydia had studied it closely, running her fingertips over the image, tracing the clean, sharp angles of his face. His jaw was well-defined, his mouth set in a firm line, his gaze direct, unwavering. There was no denying he was handsome, that he carried himself with a quiet strength, the weight of his lineage pressed into his shoulders. But a photograph could not tell her what truly mattered. It could not tell her if he was kind, if he was gentle, if he would ever see her, not just as a bride, not just as the daughter of Charles and Margaret Weatherby, but as herself. And yet, of all the questions that weighed on her mind, what kind of husband Thomas Hollingsworth would be was the least of them. Because Lydia had no intention of becoming his wife. She hadn't quite decided how to avoid it. Not yet. But she knew one thing for certain. She would not spend the rest of her life caged in a marriage she did not choose. For 8 years, Lydia had attended Boundary Oak Academy, a school known for shaping young women of fine breeding into poised, accomplished ladies. It had been strict, certainly, with its unyielding schedules, its emphasis on discipline, and its constant reminders of propriety. But she had never minded it, not truly. There had been friendships, secret notes passed between classes, and stolen moments of laughter in candle-lit dormitories. The library had been a quiet sanctuary where she could lose herself in books, and the school's sprawling gardens had offered her the freedom to wander, to dream, to imagine a life beyond the one neatly arranged for her. But then came Miss Brighton's finishing school for young ladies. It was supposed to be the final polish, the last step in perfecting her for society before she returned home. Instead, it had been a suffocating prison of rigid etiquette drills, needlepoint lessons, and excruciating lectures on how to be the ideal wife. If Boundary Oak had been a gilded cage, Miss Brighton's had been the lock on the door. She had loathed it. And as she left that life behind, Lydia Weatherby knew one thing. She was sailing home. But she would not be sailing toward the future her parents had planned for her. She would find another way, because she owed it to the girl Prudy had raised and the woman she hadn't yet been allowed to become.